Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe, foe, foe. Scoring touchdowns for the blue on blue. The Argos will win for you. Full of fight and courage, you can't stop. They pile up the points until they reach the top. Pull together till the Grey Cups won. Go Argos, go, go, go. Go Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe, foe, foe. Scoring touchdowns for the blue on blue. The Argos will win for you. Full of fight and courage, you can't stop. They pile up the points until they reach the top. Pull together till the Grey Cups won. Go Argos, go Toronto, go. Go Argos, go, go, go.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to episode 14 of the Argo Bounce Live audio show with Chris Pomay and Nick Small, a weekly podcast show devoted to the CFL's 18-time Grey Cup champion, Toronto Argonauts. I hope everyone's doing well on this Monday, September 23rd, 2024. It's a great time of the year for fall. You have college football in the States, OUA football here in Canada. You got the CFL getting closer and closer to the playoffs. And then, of course, the NFL is in week 3 as well. So I'm looking forward to our show tonight with Nick. Nick and I are going to break down the Argos Tiger Cats game from Friday night. I was in Buffalo, so I wasn't there for it. But Hamilton came up with a 33-31 win to beat the Argonauts for the third time this year. And we're going to talk to Nick about the Cats Argos games and what he saw from the stands. I watched the game later on TSN after on a replay. We're also going to talk about the new ownership of the Toronto Argonauts with Rogers taking over MLSE. And what does that mean for the Argos going into the future with Rogers now in charge of the team? And we're going to talk about the field conditions at BMO Field. I wasn't there, but it looked bad on TV, so Nick can give us a little more insight. And we're going to talk about Saturday night's matchup against the Grey Cup champion Montreal Alouettes, who are 11-2-1, and they're going to have an indigenous Argos logo, and I believe they're going to wear an orange jersey. So maybe Nick and I will talk a little bit about that as well. And I want to say thank you to everyone tuning in on live stream, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, X, and Instagram. There's an issue with Instagram right now, so hopefully we can get this on Instagram. And I want to say thank you to everyone listening to this on our audio major platforms, such as Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And thank you to those who are listening to this show on WQEE 99.1 FM in Noonan, Georgia. And we're going to bring on my co-host, Nick Small, and we're going to talk some Toronto Argonauts and Canadian Football League. Good evening, Nick. How you doing?
Hey, Chris. Let's hope that there's no technical difficulties moving on out. Off the record, we struggled to get going a little bit earlier. I was having some internet issues, so hopefully it keeps going through all the way through. Yeah, looking at this game, we've got a lot to cover about what happened, what went wrong, what went right. The other thing I'm going to showcase too is if you're watching, I've got an orange jersey on because it is a Toronto Argonauts Jack Cassar warm-up worn 45. These were the ones from last year's orange shirt game, the Truth and Reconciliation game. They were in Winnipeg, and both teams warmed up wearing orange jerseys like this one. So I happened to purchase this one, game worn from the MLSE Toronto Argonauts jersey store that you can find outside of section 224 during the Argonaut games. So I picked this up, and really looking forward to that. They unveiled the indigenous versions of the logos, and I gotta say the Toronto Argonauts one looks absolutely spectacular. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it yet, Chris.
No, I have not. How many years have they been doing this promo for?
Well, this is the first year they're really going headstrong into it with an indigenous inspired logo. Friend of mine, Argo Fluffy, as many of our listeners know him on Twitter. He he has done indigenous versions of other CFL teams' logos in the past. Last year, the Ottawa Red Blacks adopted his version of their logo, and they're going again with it this year. So you'll be able to see merchandise uh, there. And the one that the Argonauts have right now looks really incredible. It the artist, I don't have her name on hand. I apologize, but she designed it with it being a lot of orange thrown into it to sort of reflect on the meaning of Orange Shirt Day, but also in a way where the football is kind of a brown orange, which sort of resembles the old style of the boat logo. It has the oars being replaced by four individuals, four Indigenous women that represent sort of the four being a very lucky number, the seasons in particular, and there's a feather on beside the A and the Argonaut logo. It's really spectacular and beautiful. There's a full blurb on the Argonauts website and on the social media channels right now that explains it in a lot more detail than I can right now. So if you haven't seen it yet, take a look on the Toronto Argonauts website or on their social channels and check it out because it's really cool and it's going to be a really exciting thing across the league. All 9 of the CFL teams have a version of this logo that they're going to be using throughout the week, and whoever's got the buy, I think it's Calgary. They did theirs last week, so yeah.
I wonder if the NFL will do this, but hey, I think the orange is great. Are they going to, what kind of pants are they going to wear with the orange jerseys? Are they going to wear white? I'm
Well,
assuming white pants.
They only wore them during warm up last year, so I'm
they
assuming
should wear it during the game. Oh, they're not wearing it during the game?
No, to my understanding, they're not wearing them as a separate jersey. It's more a warm up jersey.
I think I honestly, Nick, I don't know if you agree with me. I think it'd be cool for them to wear orange.
Yeah, well,
wear them for the game. I know it's a start wearing it in pregame, but I think it would be nice to see them wear it for one game a year.
Well, I prefer being the double blue, not the double orange. But the good thing about it is that all the money that they raise, they sell the auction the jerseys off after, and all the money that's raised goes back to helping Indigenous groups that are struggling. And it doesn't take a lot of looking into to find the discrimination that continues to this day against Indigenous people, whether or not it comes through the long history of residential schools that extends all the way up until the 1990s, not that long ago, or you look at how Indigenous people are immediately racially profiled as shoplifters every time they go into a Loblaws or a Walmart and show their status card because somehow them saving $10 on $100 worth of food and taxes is criminal theft.
Are the Argos doing anything else for this game Saturday night, promotions wise?
I haven't heard anything yet. Last year they were the road team for the Indigenous games, so but we've seen them do Indigenous initiatives earlier. Just earlier this season, I think it was Edmonton when they played. They had an Indigenous group perform at halftime, and that was probably one of the best halftime performances that we've had at BMO Field probably since they moved there. It was really awe-inspiring. It was captivating. It was engaging, and it was a really fun night. So I think if they can build off of it and integrate part of Indigenous culture in football games every week, it doesn't have to just be a oh, here's the Indigenous Peoples Day, boom, it's done, and forget about it until next year. It's Indigenous people are a part of Canada. It's a part of Canadian history. It's something that should be embraced and celebrated every week at football games. And you see that west as well, where now we have Indigenous broadcasts of CFL games on the radio and things like that. Like there's lots of ways we can go about doing it, and it's sort of building off of the first steps. We're now in a point where we can move well on just the acknowledgement, and now it's time to really put affirmative action into place.
Is there any other teams that will the jerseys during the game, or is it a CFL rule where they can only wear it in pregame?
I believe the jerseys, the warm up jerseys, are a league wide initiative because if I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure last year all the teams did something similar. They warmed up in orange jerseys, at least those who were playing that week. Um, but I don't think I don't think they're gonna put it on top of their over their regular colors. I think too, like you got to factor too, like if one team's orange and white and the other team's white and orange, it can kind of make it a little confusing during the
Mm.
games. So I think we're only going to see it during the warm ups. Would be my understanding of it, but I could be wrong, and things could be different this year. One thing that we've seen too that has happened a lot is that they've used the indigenous versions of the logos during the games, like on the broadcast on TSN, regardless of anything else. And personally, I've been a real big fan of a lot of the indigenous inspired logos that have come out. The Saskatchewan Rough Riders one was released recently, and it looks amazing. Ottawa's, Toronto's, I said, were really good. Winnipeg's is solid, and I think Edmonton's indigenous version of the Elks logo is probably the best one in the entire league, in my opinion. I think it's an absolutely spectacular logo, and it's a good way at sort of bringing people, bringing cultures together, rather than in a time where there's a lot of political drama that breaks us apart and fragments us.
Do you think they can get the same crowd they did with Hamilton? Obviously, Hamilton probably had about 4 or 5 thousand fans there. Do you think the Argos can draw maybe close to 18,000 on Saturday night for this game against Montreal? And it's a huge game, by the way. It's a huge game for Toronto, and like I said, I don't know why they can't have a good crowd Saturday night. And it would be nice to see them have 18,000 a game. So fingers crossed about the attendance for Saturday night.
Yeah, you'd hope so. We're going into more talking about too with the Bell purchase the Rogers Media purchase from of Bell shares at MLSE. We're getting into talking about all of that and what it may hold in for the future. But I think what we've seen this past week is a tremendous success with a jump in fans to 18,000 for this week, backing up with the Saskatchewan Roughrider game before, where they had a really good attendance during the CNE game. I think more and more fans are starting to take notice that the Toronto Argonauts are a legitimately entertaining and engaging team. And I think what sets this year a little different compared to last year was very dominant leading up to that East final. It was like every game we were going into thinking, okay, who do we beat this week? This year, because of, and not just with the Argonauts, like across the league, there's so much parity right now that really, like, you take away Montreal, that's probably going to clinch the East Division now. You take away Calgary, who would basically need a miracle now to be
They,
a true
there's
contender.
Calgary's
Yeah.
done. But
But
once Nick,
everybody
go
else,
ahead.
but everybody else has a chance. Like everybody's in this game.
One thing I wanted to say to you, Nick, is Bill Parcells said this years ago. You are what your record is, and right now the Argos are 7-7. The Argos at times, Nick, have looked very good and look like a Grey Cup contender, and then there's been times they look really bad. Here's some stats I did today. The Argos this year are 6-2 against the West, which is impressive, but against their own division, they're 1-5. So for them to get to the Grey Cup, they're going to have to most likely win on the road a couple times. It can be done, but it's a very difficult road. And then the Argos on the road this year are 2-5 with wins in BC and BC and Montreal, which they weren't supposed to do, and they did it. And then at home they've been 5-2. They just the word I'm looking for, Nick, with this team this year. Obviously, there was a big changeover in free agency in the offseason, but I would say obviously nobody expected them to go 16-2 this year, Nick. I actually said they'd go 10-8, and I got laughed at by a few people. I said 10-8, and I really realistically think they still can. But there's only 4 games left, and they need to start winning some games. And like I said, it's not the end of the world losing to Hamilton again, but if they let's say they lose to Montreal Saturday night and Hamilton wins, Hamilton's going to be 2 points behind them. So to me, this game Saturday night is got to be like a playoff game for the Argonauts, and we'll see what happens. But it's just the record against the East. I guess you can play devil's advocate too, saying the East is stronger than the West this year too. So, what are your thoughts on those numbers, Nick?
Well, you bet I'm going to play devil's advocate for this because the Toronto Argonauts are still very much in this race. Yeah, with Hamilton defeating them in 3 series, you are now taking another look in the rearview mirror. But you look at sort of it from other perspectives. You look at their performance at home, it sets them in a very good position coming up this week against Montreal. Like you said, if you nitpick at certain things, the Argonauts have really good points differential compared to the rest of their teams. Ottawa's, who's above them, has a negative points differential, meaning that they win close games, but when they lose, they get destroyed. If you look at the 7-7 record, you flip that to the other division, they'd be in BC spot, second place in the West. You look at how the Hamilton Toronto matchup in itself, Hamilton wouldn't even be in a race back into things had Toronto won any one of those games. And you take those 3 games away, and Toronto's 7-4 against the rest of the league, and including that they have played up to the competition where they've beaten Winnipeg in overtime. They've beaten BC twice and dominating them, not just narrowing by, but absolutely crushing them. And they've beat Montreal, and they were the first team to beat Montreal in Montreal. So if there's any signals of hope that they have the opportunity to still rebuild the season together, they absolutely have proven it at times that against the best teams, they can do it. On the flip side, though, yeah, the unfortunate part is that the teams they've lost to have been to Hamilton 3 times and in Calgary in a way in which they've blown a multi-possession lead in the fourth quarter, which is something that definitely does need to be addressed. I don't know if necessarily it's playing to the level of your competition, but in 2 of the 3 Hamilton games, there were a lot of mistakes. First on turnovers, the second on poor defensive play.
But it's the same mistakes in all 3 games against Hamilton.
I'm not so sure about that. When you look at this most recent game, they played to cover the deep pass with a lot of zone protection deep in their zone. But what Bo was able to do so spectacularly well was read into those deep coverage routes and exploit the openings in the flats from the very first plays of the game leading up to that very end, the third and 3 or whatever it was, where he threw to James Butler for the first down. All game long, 2 receivers ran deep. The running back or the slot back behind would go up 5 yards, cut outside.
I think Nick froze there. Okay, guys, I think Nick froze there.
Game, and it wasn't like the Toronto Argonauts were fumbling the ball on a punt or at their own 20-yard line on a quarterback sneak.
But Hamilton was 16 out of 25 on second downs. They killed Toronto on second down conversion, 16 for 25. I think the Argos were way worse than that. 431 yards of offense. They had the ball for 35 minutes, 49 seconds. For the Argos to get 31 points and only having the ball 24 minutes, that's a good sign. Obviously, the positives were they only had 1 turnover. Callie made an ill-advised throw. I don't think it really cost them that much. But other than that, turnovers weren't a factor. But second downs, their defense couldn't get off the field. And when you give up 35 minutes of time of possession and 441 yards, you're not going to win. And what I liked about Hamilton, Nick, is Bo Levi Mitchell. What was his stats? I'm trying to look at his stats here. I think he was 31 out of 40, 362 yards, 1 touchdown. Okay, not a lot, same as Kelly, but no interceptions. Mitchell didn't make any mistakes. And looking at Hamilton's receiving core, it wasn't one guy that beat the Argonauts. They had a balanced attack. And for this year, Hamilton, when they play Toronto, matches up really well with Toronto. And that happens in the CFL and it happens in football. So you're right, Nick. It's not time to panic. But if they've got 4 games left, Saturday against Montreal, even if it's at home, it's going to be tough. Then they got to go to Winnipeg, and Winnipeg's a lot better football club than they were 2 months ago. And then they have Ottawa at home. Ottawa's got some issues, so that's a winnable game. And then October 25th against Edmonton. But I think these next two games are critical because if, let's say, they lose to Montreal and Hamilton upsets BC, Hamilton's within 2 points. This game would really cement the Argos playoff spot on Saturday night if they can get it.
Well, if again we're talking about teams being teams that they shouldn't, Montreal tied to Calgary. Yeah, and like I said before, Toronto was one of the only. They were the first team to beat Montreal this year, and in that game in Montreal, they were projected to be destroyed. So it really feels like at any given moment, teams can play in a way that can defeat any other team. And like looking at the Toronto Argonaut game this week against Hamilton, you look at the passing statistics were tied in terms of touchdowns. Chad Kelly and the Argos offense as a whole ran the ball extremely well. Chad had 2 rushing touchdowns from the kind of goal line, 5 yards and in region. But you had some really good carries from Kadeem Carey, 7 carries for 65 yards, 9.3 a carry. McMahon had 5 for 29, and Adebaboye had 6 for 26. So they were able to run the ball really well, but Hamilton never really bit into that, and then ran a really aggressive forward man defense. They still kept back with playing 3 down linemen and keeping a lot of their guys back to cover the zones. And I think especially at the beginning of the game, it really stagnated Chad Kelly and the Toronto Argonauts passing offense.
Well, one good thing is they didn't get off to a bad start in this game. The offense did their job, Nick, but obviously Liam missed a field goal. But you know what? It's gonna happen time to time. I'm not panicking about that. But the defense was awful in this game, and let's give Hamilton credit too, Nick. Let's give them credit. They are not as bad as their record. Obviously, they've beaten Toronto 3 times. They've beaten Ottawa. They should have beat BC. So to me, Hamilton should be at least 500 if they had won some of those earlier games. But you got to give them credit. They have a good offensive line and defensive line. And this game, unfortunately, came down to Legio again, who's one of the best kickers in the CFL, and hit a 48-yard kick. So, like you said, the Argos, this was a winnable game for the Argonauts, but going forward, they can't let the opposition have the ball for 35 minutes because your defense is going to get tired at the end. You got to get better on second. I'm sure Ryan Dinwiddie would have said this too, Nick, and you'd have to agree with me. They have to get better on second down defense, especially going against Montreal on Saturday night.
Well, it certainly was Bo Levi Mitchell who really kind of looked like he dipped into the fountain of youth there and was able to play kind of the way we were seeing him for so long in Calgary. His patience to be able to not bite into the deep coverage routes and throw too many long bombs to take advantage of that bend but don't break defense we've seen the Argonauts use even since when Corey Bass was there, that they were able to take what they were getting. And as you saw, only 1 passing touchdown and 1 rushing touchdown compared to the Toronto Argonauts, 1 passing touchdown and 2 rushing touchdowns. They were satisfied with still getting points on the board. Mark Leggio probably after that 2022 Grey Cup where his punt was blocked by Robbie Smith, I think now he's gotten some vengeance, some vindication, and probably even enjoys kicking against the Toronto Argonauts now that he's made 2 game-winning field goals back-to-back. First this past week against the Arrows, and then also back in Labor Day.
All right, Nick, we've got a comment here, and let's see who the comment's from. It is from the Tiger Cat Talk Network. Rick, good evening, Chris and Nick. Congratulations, hey, Rick. Hamilton is the Ballard Cup champions, and you beat the Argo 3 times in a row. So congratulations on that. You get another big game this week. I believe the Cats play at BC on Friday night. So that's going to be a tough game, and Nathan Rourke is going to be starter in that game. So that's an intriguing matchup between Hamilton and BC. And to be honest, I think Hamilton's going to go into BC and beat them on Friday night.
Just do what we did and sack them 7 times.
Now, Nick, obviously I wanted to. We're going to bring this up later, but I'm going to do that now. But I wanted to get your thoughts, Nick. I only saw the game on TV. You were there. Overall assessment on the return of linebacker Wynton McManus and defensive end Jarrett Brinkman.
Yeah. So Winnie McManus played fine. Like he looked like the Winnie McManus of old. So I'm not worried about him at all. When I look at the return of Jared Brinkman, of course, we're all really optimistic and hyping it up and stuff. What I do have to give credit for too, along with Bo Levi Mitchell's play, was that the Hamilton O line played extremely well and was able to give Bo the time he needed to get those passes out to the flats. Where I think when I brought up a little bit of statistics where I've looked kind of across the board with the Toronto Argonauts play so far this season through, I guess, 14 games now.
Yes.
Hard to believe we're that late into the
Yes.
season. The stat comparisons really work well this week because everybody's played 14 games too. What really kind of stands out to me is that in all those other games without Chad Kelly, the Argonauts were averaging about a turnover a game. And we've seen how often, whether it was last season or this season, that they came sort of at very opportune times. This in the last 5 games since Kelly returned, they've had just 3 turnovers, including so they had just 1 interception in the BC game against Rourke, and then that's the only one they've had in the last 4 games. And as we saw in this game against Hamilton, the one big weakness, the one play where Chad Kelly really looked awful was the one play that he tried to force one rolling to the sidelines that turned into an interception. The one play that Bo Levi Mitchell threw that went over the wide receiver's head was intercepted, but Tunde Adeleke got in the way of the wide receiver, bumped him, and I don't disagree with the call. It was absolutely a pass interference penalty that was issued on the field, and it negated the interception. It seems like this year, one thing, at least in the last couple of games, that's been really frustrating to watch from the defense. They've always had the opportunity and the ability to get opportunistic turnovers at key points in the game, and these last couple of games, really since Chad Kelly's came back, they simply haven't been able to find them to make it happen, with the exception of the Saskatchewan Roughrider game 5 games ago back during the CNE.
Well, like you said, their secondary is not as good as it was last year. So that's to me that's the biggest concerning point, Nick. I think their front four is very good. Obviously, with getting Brinkman back and McManus back in the linebackers, but I would say I'm going to be honest, as an Argo fan and a CFL fan and media person. The Argonauts' biggest weakness right now is their secondary, and they need to address that because teams are just going to do what Hamilton did. And I expect Montreal to have a similar game plan that Hamilton had against Toronto on Saturday night. So it's going to be interesting to see what Dinwiddie and the coaching staff do on the defensive side of the ball, because they've got to tighten up that secondary. Hey, Nick, most of the times when you score 31 points in a game, you're generally going to win a lot of football games. So they've got to tighten up the defense. And the Montreal game is going to be an intriguing matchup. And Montreal's going to be without one of their top receivers, Tyson Philpott, who's out for the year as well. And Montreal did come off a tie against a really bad Calgary team as well. So this game Saturday night, Nick, is very intriguing.
Well, that's exactly the sort of thing I brought up last week in terms of points and those generated by the offense since Chad Kelly's return. The average in passing yards is up right now, 288 passing yards compared to just 217 in the 9 games that Dukes and Arbuckle played before him. The yardage is up, the points are up significantly, but unfortunately the defense has given up more points than that in the majority of these games to get teams back into it. We saw just going back into it in the games. So in the game they won, the first game back, Kelly was back, they won 2019. The Hamilton game they lost in Labor Day, they were outscored 31-28, but they still got close enough to 30 points. The Ottawa game, they still got 27 points despite giving up 41, as we talked about last week, or 2 weeks ago now, I guess. Whenever they got back into the game, Ottawa was still able to score points to maintain that lead, to stay ahead. the BC game, they put up 33 points while only giving up 17. And now this week they put up 31, but they give up 33. And it's unfortunate too, because it's really easy in these closer games to be very nitpicky about certain plays. We've seen a lot of criticism right now that's been going out over the clock management at the end of the game, the passing play. I think the pass was the right play because as we saw, the guy was beat. Polk was I think it was Polk was absolutely wide open in the end zone. And unfortunately, Chad Kelly slipped, the receiver slipped, and it landed incomplete. It was a executional fail, not a strategic fail by bad coaching. If anything, I think the big weakness was that they marched down the field too quickly by going in no huddle. They left too much time on the clock to allow Hamilton to have that drive, which was something that they were unable to stop the entire game. Hamilton never really had many short field possessions, with the exception of that turnover that Chad Kelly threw. Hamilton was able to march down the field and get within field goal range almost every single drive. If we want to be nitpicky at other things, we could talk about Coxie dropping the one pass. We could talk about Lirim Haralaku hitting the field goal and getting the goalpost early in the game and getting 0 points. We could talk about John Haggerty's punting and how the first one was just bad luck on the backspin with the no yards, and then the second was just probably the worst punt he's ever made since he's came into the CFL. We talk about the lack of Janarian Grant and being able to turn the ball. So there's a lot of really little in very minor things we can dwell on that this cost us the game, that cost us the game. But if you do look at it without double blue glasses on, it was a fantastic and engaging game. There was 7 lead changes. How often do we see that happen in the CFL? It's unfortunate that, of course, they were the losing side on this game, but it's not like there were moments that you could look at moments where that cost them the game, and you could also look at moments that got them ahead in a good position to win the game.
Well, and you know what? One thing, Nick, when you know your defense is having a tough time against Hamilton, yeah, I do agree they should have taken a little more time off the clock, and you could say the same thing with the Eagles last week too. They had decided to pass the ball on 3rd and 3 or 4th and 3 instead of running it. And Barkley, if he catches the ball, first down, touchdown, game over. And I agree with the call, but a lot of people didn't. So, you know what? It's not one play, Nick. You could look at it about 10 or 15 plays that impacted this game as well. And it wasn't like Hamilton came in there and dominated the Argos.
Well,
it's just unfortunately the defense
for,
did not have a good game,
well,
and that was basically the difference in this
for
game was
for all
go
the
ahead.
ribbing that the defense got for the majority of the game, you do have to give them credit for the short yardage stand when they stopped the Hamilton Tiger Cats on 5 consecutive plays, including one that resulted in an offside, but it was maybe by barely a finger offside. So
I'm
but
not worried about the Argos front four. I'm concerned. The biggest thing to me, I'm concerned about, not the linebackers, not the defensive ends. It's the secondary. They've got to address the secondary, Nick.
well,
And
well,
if they're going to have to go on the road in the playoffs, their secondary's got to play better. Obviously,
the
with Kelly back, Nick, they're going to score their points, but they have to tighten up defensively, especially in the back end, in my opinion.
the problem without being in the Argonauts locker room right now and really understanding this whole dual coaching concept, you really wonder if, because the Hamilton Ticats were exploiting them with that play I mentioned, 2 receivers going deep, the third cutting out underneath, sort of a classic kind of chair route that you see football teams throughout the world use. You worry rather it was a lack of execution, or if the game plan specifically left them exploitable by not having someone there. Was it a misread on the field of someone not being in the right position defensively, or was it that the play itself warranted that huge weakness? And one thing that I do want to mention that I think is really important to consider, if again you're going to look at the end of the game and nitpick certain things, that final play on the game before the field goal, the Butler third down conversion, Quincy Mojet, the field side Sam linebacker, went down the play before. Robert Priester, who was playing the halfback on the opposite end of the field, had to now come down and play the field side Sam linebacker. It's very easy that if you're looking at that particular play in a window, that they might have been a miscommunication because he moved positions. It could have resulted in a misread there where him or whoever was halfback corner with him might have miscommunicated on who was supposed to be the guy to take the flats there. So it can be very challenging right now to really understand what's the problem with how they executed the defensive game plan, whether it was something to do with this dual coaching thing that there was that somehow William Fields and Kevin Iben weren't on the same page, or if it was something that the players on the field failed to execute on that was in their game plan.
Okay, Nick, this question. I saw it on TV and I thought it was in the worst shape I've ever seen it. But thoughts on the BMO Field grass service Saturday against Hamilton? You were at the game. I only watched it on TV, but that looked like the worst conditions that field's had since the Argos have been there since 2016.
Yep, I basically concur with that exact statement. We gotta find a way to get those darn soccer players to quit playing on our BMO football field 2 days before we play, because it was brutal, and I think it shows some of the double standards there, because a lot of the football players were tripping, falling, struggling to gain grip out there. It resulted in a lot of plays that were broken up, or as we saw, that became controversial in itself, like with the pass interference call at the end of the game, the roughing the passer, things like that simply came often than not because people fell down because they couldn't maintain good grip on the field.
Oh, Rick's got a comment from the Tiger Cats Talk Network. Every TV timeout, the equipment managers had to go out and take the cleat cleaner out there on both sides of the team. Yes, this reminded me of the old stadiums in the CFL that had grass fields, like Edmonton and Winnipeg. And Toronto, before you and Rick were born, Nick, had grass field at Exhibition Stadium. And there was one Grey Cup in 1972 where after that Grey Cup, Calgary coach complained about the grass fields, and the city of Toronto said, never again we will have a grass field at Exhibition Stadium. And well, 50 years later, maybe not Exhibition Stadium, they have grass field. But to be honest, for the most part, I think the field's been really well kept up for the most part. So hopefully this doesn't happen again. Could you imagine if this was a playoff game where the field was in that kind of shape?
Well, if it was a playoff game, I'd be more worried that the field would be frozen solid and they'd be basically playing on concrete. So I'm not quite as worried about that going forward. The other thing that I think a lot of people have to keep in mind with BMO Field too is that although it's the only grass field left in the league, it's really in this weird hybrid position, because in that north end zone for the majority of it, and in the very back part of the south end zone, like the last 4 yards of it, it actually goes back to being turf.
Yes.
And looking back on, again, if we're going to nitpick, the play where Chad Kelly threw it to the wide receiver wide open on the left side of the field there, that was where the field transitioned from grass to turf. And if you had grass cleats on and you switch to turf and you don't expect it, you're going to slip and fall. And that's exactly what happened there. So it's definitely the field was not up to the standards we have seen BMO Field be at. And I give a lot of credit to the crew who manages the BMO Field facilities. These are all guys who come from the realm of the guys who do professional golf greens. They take academic, high IQ biology courses on greenkeeping and how to make it as perfect as they can humanly do. But as we see, football is a game where the human elements of the game permeate through it, whether it's by the field conditions, whether it's by if we have a snowstorm and we suddenly have to play the 1996 or the 2017 Grey Cup in 3 feet of snow in -20 conditions. If if the field becomes a thing of mud like it did in 1950, or if a blanket of fog descends on the field like in the Fog Bowl. So it's those intangible elements that I think what really makes our game interesting and exciting. I certainly take it over. I think I enjoy it more at times than playing in a climate controlled, always pristine turf field, where it's always, I don't know, 28 degrees and whatnot. I think that element of it is what, especially during the Grey Cup, makes our game so unique and so special. I know nobody in the Super Bowl in the playoff run there this past year like playing in Kansas City or Buffalo when it was like minus 40 with the wind chill and everybody was frozen solid. But I kind of embrace that here in the Great White North.
Yeah, Nick, I agree with you there. But one thing most of the fans don't know, there is a heater underneath that grass field. So that's why they can have that grass field for soccer and football and going into the fall is because they do have a heater under it. Just like Lambeau Field, they have a heater under it. And for the most part, Nick, 99 out of 10 times, BMO Field has been in great shape. And I do agree with you. They had a soccer game on the Wednesday night and really only had one day off in between both matches. So I think that was a huge factor. And
Can
hopefully, off the record, Nick, hopefully nobody from the Toronto FC is watching this. Hopefully the Toronto FC are eliminated and done, and then we don't have to worry about the field until next year.
Can you imagine how ballistic their soccer fans would go if there was even a smidge of white paint from the football hash marks left on BMO Field prior to one of their games where they get blown out 4-0 to Billy Bob, middle of nowhere college FC club?
I totally agree. And it's funny how back in the old days at Exhibition Stadium, the soccer team was the last tenant. It was basically the Argos, Blue Jays, and the Toronto Blizzard. And then eventually the Blue Jays became the number one tenant and the Argos were number two. But yeah, as for the
Yeah.
soccer, you know what? I'm going to assume the field this Saturday night is going to be in much better shape. And you can't use that as an excuse either. Ryan Dimwitty would say that too. Both teams had to play on that field. So
Yep. Yep.
we'll just cross your fingers. The field's in better shape. Nick, before we wrap this show up in a few more minutes, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. I have my opinions, but thoughts on the sale of Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment to Rogers, and what does this mean for the Toronto Argonauts going forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously initially, I think there's a little bit of concerns, particularly because the one team, the one franchise that Rogers has full control on, the Blue Jays, has had an absolutely catastrophic collapse in a year where they were supposed to be a playoff contenders, if not league champions, on paper to start the year, and then just it was a complete disaster. You worry that if they get too hands on, it's gonna cause problems with all these other Toronto sport franchises. Not that anyone other than the Argonauts has had sustained success for more than 10 years, anyways. But when I look at it, they just signed Keith Pelly a year ago. Actually, this year still. I think in January or February, he became president of MLSE. So I can't see through just this short span that Bell's suddenly going to pull the plug and put their own guy in. I think it's pretty clear that Keith Pelly's got the trust in it, and I think that led to why Rogers was willing to buy into it. And then you look at it particularly with the Argonauts, we kind of know behind the scenes that Rogers is very anti-CFL, at
Oh
least
yeah,
from the perception, and that more than anything, they would love an NFL team. Well, ironically, and in a way contradictory to it, if the NFL looks at football in Toronto and they see that the Argonauts get 11,000, 12,000 fans a game in a 26,000 stadium.
30, about 28.
Yeah. Like depending on if you expand it or whatnot. Why the hell are you going to put an NFL team in a place where barely half of its attendance shows up to its one domestic football market? So until I think they're going to have to go in heavy on the Argos to promote it, to really sell the place out, because until they sell the place out, you're not going to get any interest from the NFL to have a team. And it's not just a Toronto thing, because we've seen when they've had games in Saskatchewan, nobody goes. When they've had games in Winnipeg, nobody goes. When they had the Bills in Toronto, nobody went except Bills fans who crossed the border. That probably made about half, if not a third, of the fans that went. So, like, if it defeats its own case, if you're trying to say that putting an NFL team would suddenly draw millions of football fans. I think what's interesting with this dynamic, because of the CFL and the NFL being separated from each other, you have Canadians who like the NFL who all have different teams. We have a lot of Bills fans, we have Vikings fans, we've got Dolphins fans.
There's not one.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry,
there
Nick. I
isn't
know what you're
one
saying.
team to bandwagon on.
I know what you're saying, Nick, and I agree with you. Toronto is like LA. Look at LA. Even with the Rams and Chargers, when they have their home games at SoFi Stadium, 65-70% of the crowd are the visiting teams. They don't have an alliance to Toronto. I agree with you there, Nick. And also that bring an NFL team to Toronto would cost $8 to $9 billion. And then where the hell do you build a stadium in Toronto? There's
Yeah.
no room in Toronto. You know this, Nick. Where the hell do you build the stadium? Do you build it in Mississauga? So to me, I just think the expense. I know Rogers is a $1 billion company and they've got a lot of money, but the ticket prices. Let's say they do get a stadium and they bring a team to Toronto. The ticket prices would be probably triple or more than Leaf tickets.
Well, the cost to, as we saw, I think the cost to buy that rest of the share from Bell would be more than what they would have to put down to just get franchised for an NFL team, let alone, as you said, where to put a stadium. And that's where, like, you hear the talks about the potential displacement, and that's why, after kind of spending more time reflecting on, the Argos, I think, are perfectly content with BMO Field the way it is. And even with the World Cup coming in, I don't think there's going to be anything really at this point that's signifying any long-term displacement or need for the Argos to potentially be the ones kicked out, having to play someone else. Because BMO Field, if things go to Rogers' plan, it's not suited for NFL style football
No.
either. So
I agree. The only thing, Nick, is I think for the next year, I think they're going to be fine. But 2 years from now, 3 years from now, I'm not sure. But one thing that's in the Argos' favor, there's actually two. Obviously, Mike Pinball Clements, but also I think Keith Pelly. I think Keith Pelly will have a say too. So, and I do think long term the Argos will be in Toronto. I just don't know if Rogers long term is going to want to own this team. So who knows? We'll see.
We've been through thick and thin for
Yeah.
151 years, yet the
Yep.
Toronto Argonauts still stand as the oldest professional sports franchise in North
Second
America. I
second
am
oldest.
not worried.
Hamilton's older than Toronto, they say.
No, they've changed their name. Then they
No,
didn't
no.
play, and they didn't play in the Warriors, so they don't count.
Tell that to Rick and the Hamilton Tiger Cat fans.
You mean the Hamilton Football Club, which is a different team.
Okay. Anyways, Nick, let's see. Well, let's wrap this up. Got a couple more questions, Nick. We're going to do our once a week segment, the good, the bad, and the ugly in this loss to Hamilton.
Okay. Do you want me to start, or?
You go ahead, Nick. You were at the game. I only saw it on tape delay.
Okay, let's see. The ugly. We'll always start there. The field. Yeah, there we go. There, we've talked about that already. The ugly. Despite the colored stripes that Tom Valacy and the officiating crew wears, they are not members of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Another ugly. Actually, I can't think of any. Actually, here, like I mentioned before, the punt, the last punt by John Haggerty, and I'd hate to pick on him because he's been so good, but that was probably the worst punt of his professional career, and I'm sure it's one he'd like to forget. The bad, the defense outside of that goal line stand, unfortunately, just too many passes in the flats. The turnover was a pretty bad read. I think that was the one play I think that you could say was objectively just a poor decision to throw, and one Chad should have just ran it out, have them punt, and live to fight another possession. But there's still a lot of good things you can take from it as well. I think the goal line stand, obviously, the 5 consecutive goal line stops after we felt the same thing against Saskatchewan not that long ago. It was a good feeling to be the ones on the defensive side of things and stuffing them. And then the other good, I think, was that overall, that one play aside, I thought the offense looked pretty productive, and they showed it on the scoreboard. They showed it on the stat sheet with the running game. They showed it with the touchdowns. There's still a lot of good takeaways you can have in this game, because it wasn't like they lost by coughing the ball up and getting into a massive hole like they did the last 2 times against Hamilton. It was really a true back and forth dogfight. What about you, Chris? Anything you got in mind?
Okay, we agree on the ugly, the field, the bad, the defense, minus those goal line
Yeah.
stands, and the good. I think we're gonna go a little different here. Obviously, the offense was solid, but Devarius Daniels, 4 catches for 118 yards, to me is
Yeah.
the good about
That,
this part.
that was one spectacular 60-yard reception he had. That was definitely if we're going to pick one specific individual play, that was probably the one for the Argonauts that really helped push the tide into their favor until it stopped.
This is going to be tough. Who are the Argo 3 stars of the game against Hamilton?
I think you could go a couple interesting routes. I would probably give one to Kadeem Carey, and just the way the running game looked as a whole. It really helped establish themselves early in the game, and I was almost thinking that they should have just kept running the ball if they were going to give up 7 yards every single carry. I think defensively it's a bit trickier, but I think the guy which was pretty instrumental was Winton McManus on his return. He didn't have that kind of breakout interception play where he just kind of read the mind of Bo Levi Mitchell, but I think in his return he looked solid. I thought guys like Jared Brinkman, Jake Serezna, Jack Hassar, when he came out on the goal line stand, I thought they all looked really good there. And then yeah, I'll give it to Devarius Daniels as a third, just because of that one spectacular play alone.
Nick, I'm going to agree with you on this. So, see, sometimes we do agree on things.
Yeah, there you go.
See, we don't always disagree, but it also makes good conversation if we don't always agree on things. But you make good points on that as well. Before we wrap this up, thoughts on the up and coming opponents, the 11-2-1 defending Grey Cup champion Alouettes, and what are some keys to an Argo win on Saturday night at BMO Field?
Yeah, I think when you look at it this week, you're going to have to look a lot more at what went well in the game in Montreal. I don't think you're going to be looking too much on the game that was here, week 3 of the season that they lost to Montreal.
That was a write-off, yes.
But there were still some takeaways from it. But I think, especially coming into this, where Cody Fajardo, he's looked good, but he's also, like in the last game, he looked good, but he's also shown some moments of weakness. And I think there's still a little bit of uncertainty with his health. We saw in the game where they played, Caleb Evans came in and they were able to put pressure on them. I think what it's really going to come down to is defensively, they're going to have to really make up for what happened this past week against Hamilton and really overwhelm the offensive line for Montreal. I can see a lot more inside linebacker blitzes, which we didn't see quite as much in this game against Hamilton. I think you're going to really want to put Fajardo into rushing throws early. Defensively, I mean, you could just look at this game and say, flip it and cover the flats then. But I think if you do that, you leave Fajardo the ability to throw the ball down the field as well. And I think with some of the injuries that they've got, guys missing now, I think this is where you really got to tighten it up. Play something like a 2-man under, where you've got a lot of man coverage, but you still have someone in the flats. Cover one as well probably works in the same way. Have a lot of protection, pass protection, where you're forcing the wide receivers to beat your defensive backs, because although it might lead to some deep plays, I think you've got the speed there that you should be able to overpower them and get away from the kind of cover 3, cover 4 zone defense where they're giving up too much in the flats. And then on special teams, do whatever you can to make Janarian Grant healthy so he can return the ball 68 yards or something.
I'm
Because
I'm
although
predict I'm predicting he'll play. I really think it's
I
going
hope
to
so.
come down. I think it's going to come down to the lines, the offensive line and the defensive line. And I agree with you, Nick. If their defensive line can penetrate Montreal's offensive line, don't give Fajardo time, because if you give him time, he'll pick you apart like Mitchell did. So I'm going to say this: my X factor for the Argos on Saturday night is going to come from the defensive ends. I think that's going to be key if they can pressure Montreal's offensive line, and not having Philpott hurts Alouettes a lot as well. And
The
they have to look at what Calgary did too. Obviously, Calgary didn't beat them, but they obviously played to them a 1919 tie. To me, I think the Argos. I think the front four is going to be key in this game, and I think going forward, their defense is going to be reliant on their linebackers and their front four, because their secondary just I'm sorry, I'm going to be harsh here. Their secondary hasn't been up to standards this year, other than Deshaun Amos, who I think is had a great year. So we'll see. I really think it's going to come down to the offensive line and defensive line, and I do expect the Argos to win this game. But it's going to be a nail biter. I already told Mike Hogan this. I said this game is probably going to come down to the last play, like a lot of games in this league do.
The X factor for me is actually not a Toronto Argonaut. For me, it comes down to Marc-Antoine Dequoy, the safety for the Alouettes. I've been amazed from his play ever since watching the playoff run they had last year. He's a talented leader, like Winter McManus, a good field general out there. Being in that safety position is so beneficial because you can see the whole field. But he is such a dynamic player. He seems to always be everywhere on the field at once. And you just when you think you have a deep pass to someone, he comes flying in out of nowhere and knocks the ball down or picks it off. So he's the guy I'm gonna say is gonna be the guy to watch, particularly if he dresses for Montreal for this game. He's probably, in my opinion, one of the most exciting defensive players in the CFL to watch.
Hey, by the way, Nick, you know the Eagles lost to the Falcons and their defense got roasted by the media for their performance. Well, look what they did to the New Orleans Saints Sunday. They held the Saints to 12 points at home in New Orleans after they scored 92 points. And I think the Argos players and the defense, I think they are going to have a better performance against the Montreal Alouettes. And we're going to get into our predictions, by the way, and we'll do that before we wrap this up. But CFL Week 17 picks, we've got Edmonton, Winnipeg rematch, Hamilton, BC, which is an intriguing matchup. BC's not playing really good football right now. They're inconsistent, sort of like the Argos. Hamilton's playing much better football. And then you have Ottawa at Saskatchewan, with Calgary having the bye weekend. Calgary's 4-9. I know they're still alive, but to me, Calgary's the worst team in the CFL in 2024.
Yeah, a huge fall from grace for Calgary, considering that over the last 20 years they've probably been the
Most
example of
consistent team.
stability and
It
yeah,
happens.
excellence in the league. Yeah,
It
it's someone
happens.
else's turn, and now it's Winnipeg, and who knows? In the next couple of years, maybe it's Saskatchewan winning 4 Grey Cups. We were hoping, of course, here in Toronto, that this dynasty would have a little bit more hardware to show for it, especially last year. But there's still lots of time left this year. If we're going to jump into the picks, well,
Yep. Go ahead, Nick.
Edmonton and Winnipeg. I said last week I thought starting Trey Ford over Macbeth was a mistake, and at least by how the result went, I guess I was right. So I'm going to take Winnipeg at home over Edmonton. I'm going to take BC at home over Hamilton. I still don't buy into Hamilton being that good a team yet. I'm going to pick Toronto over Montreal. And I think it's going to be a 33-28 game for Toronto. And then Ottawa and Saskatchewan, I'm going to take Saskatchewan at home, winning a 25-21 game.
Yeah, Edmonton, Winnipeg. I am going with the Blue Bombers. The Blue Bombers right now are the best team in the West, and they have the best defense. And I just think Trey Ford is a good, young, talented quarterback. I just can't see them going into Winnipeg. So I've got Winnipeg winning that game in the rematch. Hamilton and BC. I've got to go with the Hamilton Tiger Cats right now, especially the way they're playing offensively and the way Bo Levi Mitchell is. I've got to go with Hamilton, and I wouldn't call it an upset. So we'll go with Winnipeg, Hamilton, and then Toronto, Montreal. I'm going to go with the Argonauts, and I'm going to say it's going to be a 3-point game. Argonauts 29, the Alouettes 26. And then Ottawa, Saskatchewan game. Ottawa's got the better record than Saskatchewan, but you know what? Ottawa's got some injury issues, and I think Saskatchewan at home it's got enough to win their second in a row, and Saskatchewan is battling for a playoff spot. So I'm going to go with Winnipeg, Hamilton, Toronto, and Saskatchewan to win this week.
This Ottawa team just isn't the same defensively without a Darius Pickett now that he's done for the season.
Huge. That's a huge loss. Absolutely. And I wish he was still on the Argos. Same with Peters. But like you said, football is a business and you can't keep everyone. You can't pay everyone. So, but it's going to be definitely an interesting week, Nick. Out of all these games, which one intrigues you the most?
Oh, I mean, obviously it's got to be Montreal, Toronto. Yeah, I think if Saskatchewan does us a favor and beats Ottawa, I mean, we're not out of this race.
No,
like
that's
I said,
just true.
We're in the exact same spot as BC in terms of the, wins and losses. So really, it seems like at any moment, any team could get hot right now, and do it. Get it done.
Let's just pray there's no more ties. We won't get into the tie thing because you know how I feel about ties. But let's just see.
Fine.
I want to see wins and losses. None of this tie stuff. We'll leave it. One day we'll do a show on ties. But I just want to see winners and losers this weekend, Nick. And
over under through the hole. Yeah.
See, we got along. See, we get along, Nick. All right, finally, Nick. Before we wrap up our show, where can our audience follow you again on social media?
Yep. As always, hit me up at Nick_small_38.
And by the way, I have some news here. I am going to be doing media coverage for the Argos game against Montreal, so I'll be in the press box on those lousy 50-yard seats. So I will be there, and I will definitely see you. But anyone watching this show, I have 2 Argo tickets in section 115, row 7, seats 12 and 13. I'm selling them for $15 each. So if you want to go to the Argos Alouettes game on Saturday night, DM me. I have 2 good tickets in the end zone seats for $30. Where can you go to a sporting event in Toronto for $15 a ticket? So anybody out there wants to go to the Argos Alouettes games, I have 2 tickets, section 115, row 7, seats 12 and 13, $30 for the both of them. Just DM me and we'll work out a deal. Any final thoughts, Nick?
As always, the 2 words I end every broadcast on: go Argos.
Thank you so much, Nick, for coming on here, and we'll see you Saturday night at BMO Field, probably before or after the game, and hopefully an Argo win. And want to say thank you to everyone watching this live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, X, Instagram, and on all major audio platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. And thank you to everyone listening to this Argo Bounce live audio show on WQEE 99.1 FM. And anyone out there watching that has a business and you would like to sponsor our show, please DM Nick or myself, as we like to try to get some sponsorships for the Argo Bounce live audio show. Again, Nick, thank you so much for coming on here, and enjoy the rest of the week. And we'll see you Saturday night at BMO Field for the Alouettes Argos 7 o'clock kickoff game on TSN or TSN 1050. Thank you, Nick. And again, everybody, thank you for watching the Argo Bounce Live audio show. Episode 15 will be next week. The date and time will be determined as well. And please check out my social media pages this weekend for some pre and post game interviews with Toronto Argonaut players and Ryan Dimwitty after the game as well. Before we wrap this up, guys, the next Small Talk podcast tomorrow night, Tuesday, September 24th, 8 p.m. Eastern, with co-hosts Marlene Sharp and Chris Pomay, with our special guest, Vladim Govorov. He's a professional deep sea diver. He's a clay sculptor and a toy maker. So tune into the Small Talk podcast, episode 9, tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. The Argo Bounce Live audio show will return next week for episode 15. And the next live with CDP Sports and Entertainment Talk Show, sponsored by Barry Collins Chevrolet, to be announced. I am working on more guests as well. And I want to say thank you to my guest today, Amanda, for coming on our show. And you can watch that show today with Amanda, who's a country music singer from London, Ontario. Amanda Keels from London, Ontario. You can watch that show on all major platforms and, of course, WQE 99.1 FM. I hope everybody has a great night. Enjoy the Monday Night Football games. Buffalo was up 27-3 in the second quarter against Jacksonville. Washington, Cincinnati, 7-7 in the second quarter. And looking forward to the Argos Alouettes game this Saturday night. So have a great night, everybody, and thanks for watching and listening to the Argo Bounce live audio show with Chris Pomay and Nick Small. As always, go.
Together fight the foe. Scoring touchdowns for the blue on blue. The Argos will win for you. Full of fight and courage, you can't stop. They pile up the points until they reach the top. Pull together till the Grey Cups won. Go Argos, go, go, go. Scoring touchdowns for the blue on blue. The Argos will win for you. Full of fight and courage, you can't stop. They pile up the points until they reach the